title of my next talk is called The Compromised Constitution. As a teacher, I think it's very important to select an interesting and exciting and revealing title. And I specifically chose this title because on one hand, as Americans, we relish the idea that in Philadelphia in summer of 1787, there were a group of politicians who got together and who were able to work out compromises and come up with the document, the Constitution of the United States. So clearly, I could simply have called this then Compromises in the Constitution. However, as a kind of double meaning to my title, I liked to call it the Compromised Constitution, which maybe perhaps has some negative connotations. If one is compromised, one is exposed, or one has to give something up that's, it's not as positive a comment as simply saying the compromises of the Constitution. So that's the way I'm starting my talk. And I'm going to then say something else. I'm going to talk a bit about James Madison. James Madison left the Constitution a disappointed man. He left the Constitution a disappointed man because the Constitution that he envisioned was compromised. He wrote, shortly before the end of the Constitution, he wrote Thomas Jefferson, who was in Paris at the time, and he said, if this document finally gets accepted, it will neither meet the national objects that we had hoped for, nor effectively deal with the mischiefs, his word, of the state governments which everybody so detests. It's a sort of a paraphrase, but more or less it gets the meaning. The key elements here is it did not meet the national objects of creating a strong national government, and that strong national government was not going to control the mischiefs of the state governments. And the mischiefs are referring to those concepts which he articulated in the vices of the political system, the mutability, malleability of the laws, which made them unfair. All right, to see and he's leaving the convention. He's saying, "Oh my goodness, I didn't get what I wanted, and it's upsetting me." So what then was it that he didn't get? And so again, we'll talk about James Madison and James Madison's role in the Constitutional Convention. I think the most important thing we need to understand about Madison is Madison was perhaps a little on the anal side. I'm an historian. By trade, historians have to be anal. I think it's a good thing to be anal. And why do I say that? I say that because, as an historian, you do lots of research, you read lots of different things, you take lots of notes, you try to cover all your bases. And the anal Madison, somehow that's not the way we usually think of him, the anal Madison sat down and wrote copious notes on what occurred in the Constitutional Convention. Most of what we know of what was said in the convention, there was a clerk who was appointed to take notes, but he really was not anal. So he did not take very good notes. This was passed, that was passed, oh, I forgot to show up, little things like that. Madison sat there and took these notes. But he also, decades later, edited those notes. And so what we read as what happened in the convention is through the lens, not just of James Madison taking notes, but James Madison 30, 40 years later, looking back at his career, looking back at the historical developments, and shaping those notes in such a way to get us to think about certain things. And then that's very important for us to understand. So Madison took the notes. that we use. Madison also wrote the initial blueprint behind what ultimately occurred and came out of the Constitutional Convention. That blueprint is we refer to as the Virginia Plan. And Madison operated constantly throughout the convention, sometimes speaking, sometimes behind the scenes, to move things in that direction. So Madison is a vital figure, and we identify the Constitution with James Madison, and quite legitimately so. And yet, he leaves the convention a disappointed man. We're going to talk about three things. There's lots of compromises, lots of debates, lots of discussions. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritties of there was this shift, oh, let's have these many representatives or that many representatives. I'm just going to give a quick sort of sketch of the three key elements of the main compromise that comes out of the Constitution. And those three key elements are, first, the Virginia Plan. Second, the New Jersey Plan. Third, the Connecticut Compromise. And then follow that with some sort of concluding comments, talking a little bit about Madison. But one of the things I want to emphasize in this discussion, and it sometimes gets suppressed in a kind of quick scattered approach of describing the convention, everything seems so inevitable. The end result sort of seems inevitable. I want to emphasize the contingency of the moment. In that hot, long summer in Philadelphia in 1787, and if you've ever been in Philadelphia, and I was visiting Philadelphia this summer, if you've ever been in Philadelphia in the summer, you know it can be quite uncomfortable. That hot, long summer, at any moment, they could have failed. At several moments, people believed they were about to fail. That's contingency. As an historian, I love to talk about the contingency of history, that we never know what's coming tomorrow. We never know what the next thing's going to be. And we have to understand that. And we know, oh yes, there was the Virginia Plan. Oh, then there was the New Jersey Plan. Comes the Connecticut Compromise, and it all seems nice and clear and sweet. Often in textbooks, it just sort of lists these things as boom, 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 boom. But we have to understand the intensity of the debates over this. The Virginia Plan took the initial idea behind the convention of revising the Articles of Confederation and shuttled them aside and said, nope, we're going to do this entirely new. We're going to start from scratch. We're going to ignore what Congress said. We're going to ignore what the states said when they said we could hold this convention. We're going to create a new form of government. It was a plot, literally a plot, between the Virginia delegation and the Pennsylvania delegation. They got together. They got there early. The Pennsylvania delegation got there very early. Why? Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania. The Virginia delegation gets there, and they met, and they went to taverns and had dinners together, and they planned, we're going to do this thing. It's not enough simply to revise the Articles of Confederation. We're going to create a new form of government. And this new form of government, the Virginia Plan is, I believe, introduced on May 29th. And then on May 30th, Gouverneur Morris from the Pennsylvania delegation, originally from New York but lived in Pennsylvania at the time, offers the following resolution. And this resolution is that we are going to create a form of government with an executive, legislative, and judiciary branch. This was voted on. There were 8 states who had sent delegations by this time. 6 states supported this resolution. 1 state was sort of undivided, and 1 state opposed it. How many states were there? 13. Is 6 over 50% of 13? No. Based on essentially a minority decision, a vast majority of the people who showed up first, right, based on a minority decision, they decide to redo things, wipe the slate clean, and start from scratch. And the Virginia Plan and several key elements. And the biggest thing, the most important thing, is what Madison envisioned the role of Congress. Congress was going to have tremendous amounts of power. There'd be two branches of legislature, one a branch of legislature elected by the people, another branch of legislature elected by Congress. That Congress would have the ability to annul any state law. In other words, any silly little law passed by any state, that Congress could veto. That doesn't exist in the Constitution. That was the linchpin. That was the linchpin of Madison's plan. That's the one thing he wanted, because he felt that that would prevent, and you could almost say these words right now yourselves, the malleability and the mutability of laws. You know, that would ensure, think again of that letter to Thomas Jefferson, that the evils, those bad things that those state governments were doing, could be prevented. That would be, if we were to be somewhat more cynical, and as an historian I'm allowed to occasionally be cynical, that would guarantee a check on the democratic impulse of the revolution. Madison also wanted those houses of legislature to be based on, representation to be based on population and to some degree wealth. And these were the sort of key elements. There would be an executive, and the executive would have a high degree of power. In fact, there would also be a judiciary, and the executive, along with the judiciary, would form a council of revision, which would have the power which we now refer to as judicial review, the power to basically annul any law if they felt they were a violation of the Constitution. This was Madison's plan. It is offered on May 29th. On May 30th, Gouverneur Morris then says we ought to, okay, let's move on this and create a new form of government. And then they begin to talk and debate on this plan. And the people from some of the small states like New Jersey were looking at this going, what's going on? What are you trying to do here? And in June, they submit what's referred to as the New Jersey Plan. And the New Jersey Plan basically said, let's step on the brakes. Let's stop this process in its tracks, and let's merely revise the Articles of Confederation. And all we have to do to revise the Articles of Confederation is to, and again, you hopefully will know what these three things are. One, give the federal government the power to tax. Two, give the federal government the power to regulate commerce. And three, yes, we ought to have something of an executive, but not a powerful executive. It would be even possible to have a committee to become the executive. And we could just change this and offer these as amendments to the Articles of Confederation, and everything will be set. This is offered on June 15th. From June 15th to July 2nd, the convention is very chaotic. I mean, it looks like things are falling apart. Speakers are getting up and offering all kinds of ideas, debating these issues. And my favorite story in this is that Alexander Hamilton gets up and offers a speech in which he says, what we need is a monarch-like executive who's elected for life. What we need is an upper house, which is also elected for life, and we can have a lower house, which is sort of elected by the people. He gets up in the convention and says this, and people kind of go, what planet is he from? The debates go on and on. On July 2nd, they agreed to create a grand committee, one member for each delegation. They put together a document which more or less adopts most of the Virginia plan, but takes out that element which said that this Congress would have a veto over state laws. This in turn leads to another committee which is developed, the Committee of Style, and they form the final wording, which is ultimately presented to the convention. And then that's the final document that comes out of this. So here you have this process. And I want to emphasize this contingency process. I want to emphasize the debates and the chaotic nature of the debates and the effort to work in committees to patch things together and then put them through and then line by line go over some of these issues. This is what's happening. And this is how the compromise that leads to the compromised Constitution. So Madison leaves a disappointed man. And yet, we identify him with the document, and he quickly gets engaged in writing the Federalist Papers supporting the Constitution. He, in turn, goes to Virginia after that and helps push ratification through Virginia, which was a very iffy proposition, then gets sent to Congress and writes and is responsible for the creation of the Bill of Rights. Madison, disappointed in the compromised Constitution, ultimately becomes one of its biggest proponents and pushes the document, through the ratification process. Thank you.
Freedom 101 is made possible by generous support from the University of Oklahoma Alumni Association. Freedom 101 is a program of the Institute for the American Constitutional Heritage at the University of Oklahoma. For more videos and podcasts, visit freedom.ou.edu.